Summer 1943. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The test crew loaded the 75th round into the M4 Sherman sitting on the firing range. This Sherman was special, stripped of fuel and oil, filled only with ammunition. Engineers had a question. What really made Shermans burn? The 37mm anti-tank gun fired. The round punched through the sponson, entered the fighting compartment, and struck an ammunition rack. The result was instantaneous. Fire erupted inside the turret. Smoke poured from every opening. Within seconds, the interior was an inferno that carbon dioxide extinguishers couldn't touch. Only massive quantities of water suppressed the flames. The engineers recorded their observations. Penetration with full ammunition load resulted in fire 90% of the time. Not fuel fires, ammunition fires. And they were killing American tank crews at an alarming rate. What tank crews in North Africa, Sicily, and the Pacific had been reporting was true. The Sherman had a fundamental deadly problem, and in Detroit, at the Tank Automotive Center, engineer Joseph Colby was about to solve it with a solution so unconventional that senior officers initially dismissed it as ridiculous. This is the story of how American engineering transformed the Sherman from a vehicle with a 60 to 80% chance of burning when penetrated into one with only a 10 to 15% fire rate, a 75% reduction, and how German tank commanders in late 1944 couldn't understand why American tanks had suddenly stopped brewing up. The transformation happened not through heavier armor or bigger guns, but through careful observation, systematic testing, and one engineer's willingness to propose dunking ammunition in water. The M4 Sherman that rolled off production lines in early 1942 was, in many ways, an engineering triumph. Reliable, mechanically sound, easy to maintain, and mass-produced at staggering rates. American factories built over 50,000 Shermans, more than all German tank production combined. But the Sherman inherited a design flaw from its predecessor, the M3 Lee. Ammunition was stored in the sponsons, the protruding sections above the tracks. These housed vertical racks holding 75mm rounds. The location made sense for crew access and loading efficiency. The problem was that sponsons were among the most vulnerable parts of the tank. Any penetrating hit to the side had a high probability of striking ammunition. German anti-tank guns, the feared 80mm flak guns, the long-barreled 75mm weapons on Panthers, even 50mm guns on earlier Panzers, could punch through Sherman side armor at combat ranges. When the round struck ammunition, the propellant charges detonated. The post-war mythology that developed, including the nickname Ronson, supposedly after a cigarette lighter, exaggerated the reality. The Sherman was not uniquely vulnerable. German tanks burned at similar rates when penetrated. British tanks burned. Soviet tanks burned. Any armored vehicle filled with ammunition and fuel was a potential death trap. But the Sherman's specific vulnerability was ammunition stowage. And by 1943, American tankers were dying because of it. The first combat reports came from British tankers at El Alamein in late 1942. Shermans performed admirably, faster and more reliable than British tanks, with an effective 75mm gun. But British after-action reports noted a disturbing pattern. When Shermans were penetrated, they burned with alarming frequency. Crews had little time to escape. American units arriving in North Africa reported similar experiences. During the Tunisia campaign, Sherman crews discovered that survival after a penetrating hit was often a matter of seconds. If the ammunition didn't cook off immediately, you might escape. If it did, you were probably dead. Technical officers filed reports. The pattern was clear. Side hits resulted in catastrophic ammunition fires. When a kinetic penetrator slammed into an ammunition rack, The impact and heat ignited propellant. Once one round ignited, the fire spread instantly to adjacent ammunition. By spring 1943, the Ordnance Department couldn't ignore the problem. Something had to be done. Joseph Colby was director of the Tank Automotive Center in Detroit, established in 1942 to centralize American tank development. He was methodical, detail-oriented, and willing to challenge conventional thinking. Colby understood that fixing the fire problem required understanding it precisely. He authorized comprehensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground. The tests were methodical and brutal. Engineers prepared several Shermans with different configurations, some with ammunition and fuel, some with ammunition only, some with fuel only. Each was subjected to penetrating fire from various weapons. The results demolished assumptions. Fuel fires were rare. Gasoline didn't ignite reliably when hit by armor-piercing rounds. In several tests, rounds holed fuel tanks without causing fires. Ammunition fires, however, were nearly universal. In tests with full ammunition loads, 90% of penetrations striking the fighting compartment caused immediate catastrophic fires. This discovery focused the solution. Protect the ammunition, and you protect the crew. The initial fix was crude. In late 1943, Ordnance authorized welding 1-inch applique armor plates over the sponson ammunition areas. The modification helped marginally, but wasn't a real solution. The extra armor added 5,000 pounds, degrading performance. More fundamentally, it didn't prevent penetration by the most dangerous German weapons. An 88mm gun could punch through both layers. The problem remained. Colby's team considered more radical solutions. If external armor wasn't enough, what about relocating the ammunition entirely? The concept was revolutionary in its simplicity. Move ammunition from the vulnerable sponsons to the hull floor, the lowest part of the interior. The hull floor was below the track line, what Germans called the dead zone, because penetrating rounds almost never reached that low. But moving ammunition created new problems. How would the loader access it during combat? Would it reduce interior space? The engineers redesigned carefully. Hull-floor ammunition racks were arranged for accessibility. The turret basket was modified to allow the loader to reach them. Storage capacity actually increased slightly. The redesigned Sherman could carry 104 rounds. But Colby proposed an additional modification that seemed completely impractical. He suggested surrounding the ammunition racks with water. The concept of wet stowage emerged from the Aberdeen fire suppression tests. Engineers discovered that water was the only effective agent for fighting ammunition fires. Carbon dioxide extinguishers were useless. Only massive quantities of water could extinguish burning propellant. Colby's logic was elegant. If water suppressed ammunition fires after they started, why not use it preventively? Surround ammunition with water, and any penetrating round would pass through water first, absorbing heat and potentially preventing ignition. If ignition occurred, water would pour onto the burning propellant immediately. The engineering challenges were substantial. How do you contain water inside a moving, bouncing, tilting tank? How do you prevent freezing? How do you prevent corrosion? The solution was a system of concentric cells. Each ammunition bin had an inner compartment holding rounds and an outer jacket surrounding it. The space between was filled with a water-glycol mixture, water for fire suppression, glycol to prevent freezing, plus corrosion inhibitors. Critically, the water jackets weren't completely filled. A small airspace was left at the top. Early tests with fully filled jackets failed catastrophically. Hydraulic pressure from incompressible water caused containers to explode, spreading burning propellant. With airspace, the system worked. Water absorbed impact energy and heat. If a round penetrated the jacket, water poured onto ammunition, suppressing any fire. The ammunition in that specific rack might be compromised, but fire didn't spread. The complete system, relocated ammunition plus water jacket protection, was designated wet stowage. It added about 900 pounds for water and 1,000 pounds for additional ammunition capacity. But the weight was low in the hull, actually improving stability. Testing at Aberdeen proved the concept. Wet stowage. Shermans subjected to penetration tests that previously produced 90% fire rates now showed dramatic improvement. Out of 14 ammunition cells penetrated, only 2 caught fire. The system worked. Production of wet stowage. Shermans began in early 1944. The M4A1-76W entered production in January. The M4A3-75W began in February. Other variants followed, all equipped with wet stowage from the start. Fisher Body became the sole manufacturer of 75mm M4A3 Shermans with wet stowage. From February 1944 to March 1945, Fisher produced 3,071 M4A3 75W tanks, the culmination of Sherman development. The first operational deliveries arrived in England in May and June 1944, perfectly timed for Normandy. As units suffered losses during the campaign, replacement tanks included increasing numbers of wet stowage variants. By late summer 1944, they were flowing into frontline units in significant numbers. Tankers noticed the difference immediately. Whole-floor ammunition storage changed crew procedures. Loaders had to adapt to reaching ammunition from floor racks. Some crews initially disliked it, but the changed fire statistics were impossible to ignore. The Army conducted systematic operational analysis throughout the European campaign. Engineers examined knocked-out tanks, interviewed surviving crews, and compiled statistics. The data was stunning. A 1945 study showed 60 to 80% of dry stowage. Shermans burned when penetrated. Only 10 to 15% of wet stowage. Shermans burned under identical conditions. The reduction was approximately 75%. 3 out of 4 tanks that would have burned now survived fires. This translated directly into crew survivability and vehicle recovery rates. British tank units compiled similar statistics. Of 166 Shermans knocked out during Normandy operations, 94 burned, but virtually all were early dry stowage models. Wet stowage. Shermans showed dramatically lower fire rates. The operational impact was profound. Tank crew morale improved. Units equipped with improved tanks fought more aggressively. Recovery units reported fewer totally destroyed tanks. Repair depots could restore penetrated tanks to service if they hadn't burned. German intelligence never understood what changed. They photographed American tank parks, interrogated captured crews, and examined knocked-out Shermans. But wet stowage. Shermans looked nearly identical to earlier models externally. The ammunition system was entirely internal. Unless German engineers examined an intact interior, they wouldn't know about the water-jacketed racks. German after-action reports from late 1944 noted a puzzling trend. Shermans were surviving penetrating hits with greater frequency. Tank commanders reported confirmed penetrations that weren't burning as expected. Instead, American tanks would reverse out of combat, often still firing. Some German officers speculated about improved armor composition or better fire suppression techniques. None identified the actual solution. The wet stowage system remained an American secret, not through deliberate operational security, but because its benefits were entirely internal. This was one of the most effective, silent improvements of the war. German tank crews continued encountering Shermans, but increasingly those Shermans refused to burn. The Pacific Theater presented different challenges but similar fire problems. Wet stowage. Shermans arriving from mid-1944 onward provided crucial advantages. Relocated whole-floor ammunition was better protected from top attack weapons. Japanese infantry attacking from above had difficulty reaching low-mounted ammunition. By spring 1945, virtually all Sherman production incorporated wet stowage. Of approximately 50,000 Shermans produced, roughly 10,000 had factory-installed wet stowage systems. Thousands more were retrofitted. By May 1945, the majority of Shermans in European operations were wet stowage variants. The modification's success extended beyond the Sherman. The M26 Pershing incorporated similar ammunition protection concepts. Post-war M46, M47, and M48 Patton tanks all featured variations inspired by Sherman wet stowage. Even modern tanks reflect this heritage. The M1 Abrams features ammunition stored in the rear turret bustle, separated from the crew by armored blast doors. While the technology differs, blowout panels instead of water jackets, the principle remains: isolate ammunition from the crew and protect it from catastrophic detonation. Joseph Colby's ridiculous idea became a fundamental principle of armored vehicle design that persists 80 years later. The human cost remains difficult to quantify precisely, but extrapolating from the documented 75% reduction in fire rates, wet stowage likely saved thousands of Allied tank crew lives. Every Sherman that was penetrated but didn't burn gave its crew a chance to survive. Technical Sergeant William A. Hastings, 2nd Armored Division, described the experience in February 1945. "We took a hit yesterday that would have cooked us in the old tanks. Krauts knocked a hole in our side. We thought we were done. But nothing caught fire. We backed out, sealed the hole with a tarp, and were back in action the next day. I don't understand it, but I'm alive to write this letter because of it." Stories like Hastings's repeated throughout Allied armored forces. The aggregate effect of individual survivals transformed entire units' combat effectiveness. After the war, Joseph Colby retired as Brigadier General. His contributions were recognized within military circles, but remained relatively unknown publicly. The Tank Automotive Center evolved into the modern U.S. Army Tank Automotive Research Development and Engineering Center. The engineering philosophy Colby helped establish, systematic testing, challenging assumptions, focusing on crew survivability, became fundamental to American armored vehicle development. Modern military historians increasingly recognize wet stowage as one of the most effective vehicle modifications of the war. It cost relatively little: water, glycol, and redesigned racks. It required no exotic materials or complex manufacturing, but it saved thousands of lives and kept thousands of tanks in combat. The Sherman's reputation has undergone significant rehabilitation as myths have been debunked. The Ronson nickname has been exposed as largely a post-war fabrication. The slogan didn't exist during the war. What was real was the original fire vulnerability, the systematic effort to fix it, and the remarkable success of that fix. 60 to 80% fire rates reduced to 10 to 15%. 75% fewer catastrophic fires. Thousands of lives saved. That's not mythology. That's engineering. Inside wet stowage, Shermans displayed at military museums, visible if you know where to look, are the water jacket ammunition racks on the hull floor. 80 years later, they remain testament to what engineering can accomplish when smart people focus on solving real problems. This story isn't about revolutionary technology or exotic science. It's about observation, testing, analysis, and practical problem-solving. About an engineer willing to propose an unconventional solution and a military institution willing to test it fairly and implement it rapidly when it worked. Most importantly, it's about the thousands of Allied tank crew members who came home because an engineer in Detroit suggested something that seemed ridiculous: fighting fire with water before the fire even started. Every time a penetrating round struck a wet Stowage Sherman's ammunition rack and failed to cause catastrophic fire, Colby's innovation proved itself. Every crew that survived a hit that should have killed them. Every tank recovered instead of abandoned as a burned hulk. Every mission completed by tank forces that could fight aggressively because they weren't paralyzed by fear of burning alive. The modification that made the Sherman stop exploding wasn't bigger guns or thicker armor. It was water in the right place at the right time, designed by engineers who understood that protecting the crew meant protecting the ammunition. 3/4 fewer fires, thousands of lives saved, one engineer's unconventional solution tested rigorously, implemented systematically, and proven in combat. That's how you win a war.